The fluorescent lights buzz overhead as Dr. Sarah Chun adjusts her surgical mask, her eyes narrowing at the mass protruding from 63-year-old Robert Martinez's left shoulder. What should have been a routine cyst removal has turned into something far more sinister. The tumor, roughly the size of a tennis ball, seems to pulse with its own rhythm beneath the sterile blue drape. "Scalpel," Dr. Chun requests, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. As the blade makes contact with the skin, a foul odor immediately fills the room, something between rotting eggs and decay. The surgical nurse steps back, covering her mask with her glove. "Doctor, is that normal?" asks Dr. James Wright, the resident assisting with his first major procedure. Before Dr. Chun can respond, something dark and viscous begins to ooze from the incision. But it's not blood. It's something else entirely, something that seems to move on its own. The heart monitor's steady beeping suddenly spikes as Robert's unconscious body begins to convulse slightly on the table. "What the hell is that?" whispers the anesthesiologist, his face pale above his mask. Dr. Chun's hands freeze as she watches something writhe beneath the surface of the wound. In her 15 years of surgery, she has never seen anything like this. The mass appears to be alive, responding to the light, pulling back from her instruments as if it has a mind of its own. "Get me pathology on the line," she says, her voice barely concealing her horror. "And someone call the CDC. I think we're going to need them." Robert Martins sits at his kitchen table, rolling his left shoulder as his granddaughter Emma colors. Beside him, the 8-year-old looks up with concern, her crayon pausing mid-stroke. "Grandpa, why do you keep doing that?" she asks, mimicking his shoulder movement. "Just a little stiff, Mia," Robert says with a forced smile. But the truth is more complicated. The lump on his shoulder has been growing for months now, maybe even years. What started as a small, hard knot, the size of a marble, has slowly expanded, becoming more pronounced and increasingly uncomfortable. His daughter Maria enters the kitchen, carrying groceries. At 35, she has her father's stubborn streak and her late mother's intuition. She immediately notices her father's discomfort. "Dad, you're favoring that shoulder. Again. When was the last time you saw a doctor?" Robert waves her off dismissively. "I'm fine, Maria. It's just age. Your grandmother always said I was getting old before my time, but Maria isn't convinced. She's been watching her father for weeks now, noticing how he sleeps sitting up in his recliner, how he winces when he reaches for things, how he started wearing loose-fitting shirts to hide the increasingly obvious bulge on his shoulder. Dad, that lump is getting bigger. I can see it through your shirt now." "It's nothing," Robert insists, but his voice lacks conviction. The truth is, he's terrified. As a Vietnam veteran who worked construction for 40 years, he's always prided himself on his toughness. Admitting something might be seriously wrong feels like admitting defeat. Emma looks between her grandfather and mother, sensing the tension. "Does it hurt, Grandpa?" Robert's expression softens as he looks at his granddaughter. "Sometimes, sweetheart, but Grandpa's tough, remember?" That evening, after Emma has gone to bed, Maria confronts her father in the living room. She's brought back up her husband Carlos and her older brother Miguel, who drove down from Phoenix specifically for this conversation. "Dad, we need to talk," Maria begins, settling into the chair across from his recliner. Robert immediately becomes defensive. If this is about my shoulder, it is, Miguel interrupts. Dad, I saw you 3 months ago, and that thing wasn't nearly as big as it is now. It looks like you've got a baseball under your skin. Carlos, who works as a paramedic, nods gravely. Robert, I've seen a lot of things in my line of work. That's not normal. That's not even close to normal. Robert shifts uncomfortably, the movement causing him to grimace slightly. The pain has been getting worse, especially at night. Sometimes he wakes up feeling like something is moving under his skin, but he's convinced himself it's just his imagination. Look, I know you're scared, Maria says gently, reaching for her father's hand, but we're more scared of losing you. Mom would want you to get this checked out. The mention of his late wife, Carmen, who died from cancer 5 years earlier, hits Robert hard. Carmen had ignored her symptoms too, insisting she was fine until it was too late. She fought so hard at the end, Robert says quietly. The doctors, the treatments, none of it worked. But early detection might have made a difference, Miguel points out. You know that, Dad. Robert looks around at his family, the people who love him most in the world, and sees the fear in their eyes. It's the same fear he saw in Carmen's eyes when she finally admitted something was wrong. Okay, he says finally. I'll make an appointment. Dr. Patricia Williams has been practicing family medicine for 25 years, but the growth on Robert's shoulder makes her pause during the examination. She palpates the mass carefully, noting its firm consistency and irregular shape. How long has this been present, Mr. Martinez? She asks, making notes in his chart. A few months, Robert lies, then corrects himself under Maria's stern gaze. Maybe longer, a year, maybe 2. Dr. Williams frowns, pressing more firmly around the edges of the growth. Does it hurt when I do this? A little, Robert admits, though the pain is actually quite sharp. Any discharge? Any changes in color or temperature? Sometimes it feels warm, Robert says. And there's ... Sometimes there's a smell. This information alarms Dr. Williams. She's seen plenty of cysts and lipomas in her career, but this doesn't feel like either. The mass seems to have a complex internal structure, almost like it contains multiple components. Mr. Martinez, I'm going to refer you to a specialist. This needs to be evaluated more thoroughly. What do you think it is? Maria asks. Dr. Williams chooses her words carefully. It could be a number of things. A complex cyst, a lipoma with unusual characteristics, or ... something else. The important thing is to get a proper diagnosis. But privately, Dr. Williams is deeply concerned. In her notes, she writes, unusual subcutaneous mass, left shoulder. Recommend urgent surgical consultation. Rule out malignancy. As the Martinez family leaves the office, Dr. Williams can't shake the feeling that she's just encountered something far outside her normal experience. The MRI facility at St. Mary's Hospital hums with activity as Robert slides into the massive machine. The technician, Lisa Park, has performed thousands of these scans, but as the images begin to appear on her screen, she finds herself leaning closer to the monitor. That's unusual, she mutters to herself. The mass on Robert's shoulder appears on the scan as a complex, multi-layered structure with what appears to be internal movement. There are dark areas that could be fluid, but also solid components that seem to have grown in an organized pattern. Lisa calls Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the radiologist on duty. "Dr. Santos, you need to see this MRI. I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Santos examines the images with growing alarm. The mass appears to have its own blood supply, with vessels feeding into it from multiple directions. More disturbing, there seem to be structures within the mass that look almost architectural, like something has been building inside Robert's shoulder. "Has the patient traveled recently?" Dr. Santos asks. "Any history of foreign objects?" "Military." "Service?" Lisa checks the file. "Vietnam veteran." "Construction worker." Dr. Santos nods grimly. "Get him scheduled for a biopsy immediately. And call Dr. Chun in surgery. She's going to want to see this." Meanwhile, in the waiting room, Robert sits with Maria, trying to ignore the increasing discomfort in his shoulder. The mass seems to be more active lately, almost like it's responding to all the medical attention. "Dad, you're sweating," Maria observes. "Are you okay?" Robert nods, but he's not okay. He can feel something moving under his skin, a sensation that's been getting stronger over the past few days. Sometimes, when he's very still, he swears he can feel a rhythmic pulsing that doesn't match his heartbeat. Back in the operating room, where our story began, Dr. Chun has made the initial incision and is now faced with something that defies medical explanation. As she carefully extends the opening, the full scope of what has been growing inside Robert's shoulder becomes apparent. "Jesus Christ," whispers Dr. Wright, the resident who has gone pale despite his surgical training. Inside the mass is not a tumor, not a cyst, not anything that appears in medical textbooks. Instead, there is a complex structure that looks almost like a cocoon made of human tissue and foreign material. And something is definitely alive inside it. Dr. Chen uses forceps to carefully probe the structure. As she does, it seems to contract, pulling away from her instruments. A thick, dark fluid begins to seep out, carrying with it a smell so putrid that even the surgical masks can't filter it completely. "Dr. Chung," the surgical nurse says urgently, "look at this." She's pointing to what appears to be movement deep within the mass. Something is writhing inside the tissue-wrapped cocoon, something that definitely doesn't belong in a human body. "Get me better lighting," Dr. Chun orders, her training overriding her shock. "And someone call infectious diseases. We need specialists here now." As the lights brighten, the true horror becomes visible. Embedded in the tissue are what appear to be fragments of metal and wood, materials that have been slowly encased by growing biological matter over decades. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is the larvae, dozens of them, each about the size of a pencil eraser, writhing in the dark recesses of the mass. They appear to be some sort of parasitic insect, but unlike anything in North American medical literature. How is this possible? Dr. Wright asks, his voice shaking. Dr. Chun carefully extracts one of the larger pieces of foreign material. It appears to be a fragment of bamboo with metal shards embedded in it. Suddenly, the pieces start to fall into place. "Shrapnel," she says quietly. "This is old war trauma." But the biological component, this is something else entirely. As if responding to the light and air, the larvae become more active, some actually emerging from deeper within the mass. The surgical team watches in horrified fascination as creatures that have been living inside Robert Martinez for decades finally see daylight. 3 hours later, Robert slowly awakens in the recovery room, his shoulder heavily bandaged but finally free of the burden he's carried for almost 50 years. Maria sits beside his bed, tears in her eyes, while Dr. Chun stands nearby with a clipboard full of questions. "Dad, you're awake," Maria says, squeezing his hand gently. Robert's eyes focus. Slowly, the anesthesia still clouding his thoughts. Is it ... is it over? Dr. Chun approaches the bed. "Mr. Martinez, we need to talk about what we found. The mass we removed contained foreign objects, metal, and organic material that appears to have been in your body for decades." Robert's expression changes as memory begins to surface. "Vietnam," he says quietly. "Can you tell us what happened?" Dr. Chun asks gently. Robert closes his eyes, and for the first time in 50 years, he allows himself to remember that day in the jungle outside. Da Nang. He was 22 years old, on patrol with his unit when they walked into an ambush. "Booby trap," he says, his voice barely audible. Bamboo spikes with metal fragments. "I got hit in the shoulder, but I thought they got all the pieces out at the field hospital." Maria listens in shock. Her father has never talked about Vietnam, never shared the details of his service. "But Dad, why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you get it checked when it started growing?" Robert opens his eyes, looking directly at his daughter. "Because I was ashamed. We lost 3 guys that day because I wasn't paying attention. I thought maybe I deserved to carry that with me." Dr. Chun pulls up a chair. "Mr. Martinez, what was living in your shoulder appears to be a species of tropical larvae that somehow survived and thrived in the environment, created by the foreign material. They've been feeding on dead tissue and creating their own ecosystem inside your body." The revelation is both horrifying and strangely liberating for Robert. The thing that has been literally eating him alive for decades is finally gone. "The good news," Dr. Chun continues, "is that we believe we removed everything. The tissue around the mass was healthy, and there's no sign that the infestation spread to other parts of your body." Emma appears in the doorway with Carlos, having been allowed to visit now that her grandfather is stable. She runs to his bedside, careful not to bump his injured shoulder. "Grandpa, does it feel better now?" Robert looks at his granddaughter, then at Maria, then at the medical team that saved his life. For the first time in decades, his shoulder doesn't hurt. More importantly, for the first time since Vietnam, he doesn't feel like he's carrying the weight of that terrible day alone. "Yes, Mia," he says, his voice strong and clear. "It feels much better." 2 days later, the hospital's infectious disease department has become a hub of activity. Dr. Marcus Webb, an entomologist from the University of Arizona, examines the preserved larvae under a high-powered microscope, while Dr. Chun and several other specialists look on. "These specimens are remarkable," Dr. Webb says, adjusting the focus. "They appear to be a species of botfly larvae, but genetically modified by decades of adaptation to a human host environment. The larvae, now dead and preserved, still look alien and disturbing under magnification. They had developed specialized feeding appendages and what appears to be a primitive social structure within the confines of Robert's shoulder mass." "How did they survive so long?" asks Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the infectious disease specialist. "The foreign material created a perfect microenvironment," Dr. Webb explains. "The bamboo provided organic nutrients The metal fragments created minerals, and Mr. Martinez's body provided a steady supply of blood and tissue. They essentially farmed human tissue for 50 years. Dr. Chun reviews the surgical photos and video. The most disturbing part is how organized it was. They had created chambers, almost like a hive structure, within the mass. The discovery has attracted attention from the CDC and several universities. This case represents something unprecedented in parasitology, a long-term symbiotic relationship between tropical larvae and a human host that somehow remained stable for decades. "Are we going to publish this?" Dr. Wright asks. "With Mr. Martinez's permission," Dr. Chun replies. "This could help other veterans who might be carrying similar hidden wounds from their service." News of Robert's case spreads quietly through medical channels, and within a week, Dr. Chun receives calls from 3 other doctors reporting similar cases in Vietnam veterans. The pattern is becoming clear. Soldiers wounded by biological booby traps in tropical environments may be carrying more than just physical scars at the VA hospital across town. Dr. Ronald Peterson reviews the files of several patients who have reported growing masses or chronic pain in old wound sites. For years, these complaints were dismissed as psychological or age-related, but Robert's case has opened new possibilities. "We need to start screening," Dr. Peterson tells his staff. "Any veteran with unexplained growths or chronic pain in old wound sites needs to be evaluated for possible parasitic involvement." The implications are staggering. Potentially hundreds of veterans could be living with similar infestations, slowly being consumed from the inside by creatures that have made their bodies home. Meanwhile, Robert continues his recovery at home, marveling at the absence of pain that has been his constant companion for decades. But he's also grappling with the psychological impact of learning what had been living inside him. "I keep thinking about all those years," he tells Maria during one of their walks around the neighborhood. "All those nights I felt something moving. In there, I thought I was going crazy." "You weren't crazy, Dad. You were carrying a piece of that war with you all this time." Literally, Robert says with dark humor. "Carmen used to say I never really came home from Vietnam. Turns out she was more right than she knew." Dr. Amanda Foster, a trauma counselor who specializes in working with veterans, meets with Robert to help him process the unique nature of his experience. Her office is comfortable and non-threatening, filled with plants and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the sterile medical environments Robert has become accustomed to. "Robert, what you've been through is extraordinary in the most literal sense," Dr. Foster begins. "You've been carrying physical evidence of trauma for 50 years. That's going to have psychological implications we need to address." Robert shifts in his chair, still favoring his left side despite the successful surgery. "I keep having dreams about it, about things crawling inside me. That's completely understandable. In a very real sense, you've been violated by this infestation. Your body hasn't been entirely your own for decades." They talk about survivor's guilt, about the shame Robert has carried since that day in the jungle when his unit was ambushed. The 3 soldiers who died were younger than him, and he's spent 50 years wondering why he survived when they didn't. "Maybe," Dr. Foster suggests, "this infestation was part of your survival. Maybe your body found a way to contain and isolate the foreign material instead of rejecting it, which could have killed you. This perspective offers Robert a new way to think about his experience. Instead of seeing the larvae as punishment for surviving, he begins to understand his body's response as a remarkable adaptation that kept him alive. Your immune system essentially created a prison for these organisms, Dr. Foster explains. It contained them, controlled them, and prevented them from spreading. In a very real sense, your body won a 50-year war. 6 months later, Dr. Chun stands before an audience of surgeons, infectious disease specialists, and military medical personnel at the International Conference on Tropical Medicine. Behind her, large screens display the surgical footage and microscopic images from Robert's case. The Martins case represents a paradigm shift in how we understand long-term parasitic relationships. She tells the rapt audience, "This patient carried a thriving ecosystem inside his body for 5 decades without developing systemic infection or sepsis." The presentation includes detailed genetic analysis of the larvae, showing how they adapted to their human host environment. Over generations of reproduction within Robert's shoulder, they had become increasingly specialized for their unique habitat. Most remarkably, Dr. Chun continues, the patient's immune system appears to have reached a détente with the infestation. Rather than mounting a continuous inflammatory response, his body learned to coexist with the foreign organisms. Dr. James Harrison, a tropical medicine specialist from Johns Hopkins, raises his hand. What are the implications for other patients? How many veterans might be living with similar infestations? We've now identified 17 similar cases. Across the country, Dr. Chun replies. All Vietnam veterans, all wounded by organic booby traps in tropical environments. We're recommending comprehensive screening for any veteran presenting with unexplained masses or chronic pain in old wound. Sites. The audience murmurs at the implications. 17 cases discovered in 6 months suggests there could be hundreds more waiting to be diagnosed. Robert Martinez sits in a VA hospital waiting room, but this time he's not there as a patient. He's there as a volunteer, speaking with other veterans about his experience and encouraging them to seek medical attention for symptoms they might have been ignoring. I spent 50 years thinking I was weak for having pain, he tells a group of grizzled veterans. Turns out I was fighting a war inside my own body and didn't even know it. His story has become legendary within veteran circles. The man who carried living creatures inside him for half a century and survived to tell about it has become a symbol of resilience and the importance of seeking medical care. Don't be like me, he tells them. Don't wait until something the size of a baseball is growing out of your shoulder. If something doesn't feel right, get it checked out. Among his audience is Tommy Rodriguez, a Vietnam veteran who has been experiencing back pain and strange sensations for years. Robert's story convinces him to schedule an appointment with his doctor for the first time in a decade. Maria watches her father speak and marvels at the transformation. The man who was once ashamed of his war experiences now uses them to help other veterans. The trauma that nearly consumed him has become a source of healing for others. He's found his purpose, she tells Carlos as they listen from the back of the room. All those years of carrying that burden, and now he's using it to help people. Dr. Webb publishes his findings in the Journal of Parasitology, describing the unique adaptation of the larvae found in Robert's shoulder. The paper, titled Long-Term Human Parasite Coevolution in a Combat-Related Wound Environment, becomes one of the most cited articles in recent parasitology research. The genetic analysis reveals that the larvae had undergone rapid evolutionary changes during their decades inside Robert's body. They had developed more efficient feeding mechanisms, reduced reproductive cycles to match their confined environment, and even evolved chemical signals that seemed to suppress their host's immune response. This case represents a unique opportunity to study rapid evolutionary adaptation in real time, Dr. Webb writes. The Martinez larvae had essentially become a new subspecies adapted specifically for long-term human cohabitation. The research has implications far beyond Robert's individual case. Understanding how these organisms adapted to human host environments could lead to new treatments for parasitic infections and better understanding of how the human immune system responds to long-term foreign presence. Several pharmaceutical companies have reached out about developing new anti-parasitic medications based on the research. The irony is not lost on Robert that the creatures that tormented him for 50 years might now contribute to healing others. As word of Robert's case spreads through the medical community, more veterans come forward with similar stories. Each case is unique, but the pattern is consistent. Organic wounds from tropical environments that never quite healed properly. James Tucker, a Marine who served near the DMZ, discovers that the chronic pain in his leg is caused by a colony of microscopic worms that have been living in scar tissue for 45 years. Unlike Robert's case, Tucker's infestation is smaller but has been slowly spreading, requiring multiple surgeries to remove completely. David Chun, no relation to Dr. Chun, finds that his recurring abdominal pain is caused by plant matter that had been contaminated with parasitic eggs when he was wounded by a punji stick. The foreign material had created a sealed environment where the parasites could reproduce in small cycles for decades. Each case teaches doctors something new about the long-term effects of tropical warfare wounds. The medical community begins to understand that the Vietnam War continues to affect its veterans in ways that were never anticipated. 8-year-old Emma Martinez stands before her third-grade class, presenting her science project about her grandfather's medical case. With her teacher's help, she's created a display showing the life cycle of parasites and how they can adapt to different environments. My grandpa had bugs living in his shoulder for my whole life, she explains to her classmates with a matter-of-fact tone that only children can manage. The doctors said they were really good at hiding. Her project includes photos that Dr. Chun provided, heavily sanitized for elementary school audiences, and drawings Emma made showing how the larvae survived inside her grandfather's body. The other children are simultaneously grossed out and fascinated. "Did it hurt?" asks her friend Marcus. "Sometimes," Emma replies. "But Grandpa is really tough. He's a soldier." The project wins first place in the school science fair, but more importantly, it represents Emma's way of processing her grandfather's experience. Through research and presentation, she's turned something frightening into something educational and empowering. Robert attends the science fair and watches his granddaughter present their family's medical odyssey to a room full of curious children and parents. He realizes that Emma has done something he couldn't do for 50 years. She's taken the shame out of his condition and turned it into something that can teach and inspire others. 1 year after his surgery, Robert returns to Dr. Chun's office for his final follow-up appointment. The scar on his shoulder has healed completely, leaving only a thin line where the massive growth once protruded. "How are you feeling, Mr. Martinez?" Dr. Chun asks as she examines the surgical site. "Like a new man," Robert replies, and he means it. The chronic pain that had been his constant companion for decades is completely gone. More importantly, the psychological burden he'd carried has lifted as well. Any phantom sensations? Any feeling that something is still there? Robert considers the question carefully. "The first few months I kept expecting to feel movement under the skin. I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking they were back. But that's stopped now." Dr. Chun nods. "That's completely normal. Your nervous system spent 50 years adapting to the presence of foreign material. It takes time for those neural pathways to adjust to its absence. The tests show no sign of remaining infestation. The wound has healed cleanly, and Robert's immune system has returned to normal function. From a medical standpoint, his case is a complete success." "Dr. Chun," Robert says as the appointment concludes, "I want to thank you for more than just the surgery. You gave me my life back. You carried that burden for 50 years, Mr. Martinez. You're the one who survived it. I just helped you set it down." Robert's case has triggered a comprehensive review of veteran medical records across the country. The Department of Veterans Affairs has issued new screening guidelines for Vietnam veterans, specifically looking for signs of parasitic infestation in old wound sites. Dr. Patricia Gomez, director of the VA's new Tropical Medicine Initiative, reports that they have now identified over 100 cases of long-term parasitic infestation among Vietnam veterans. Some cases are minor, requiring only medication to eliminate remaining organisms. Others require surgery as extensive as Robert's. The Martinez case opened our eyes to a problem we didn't know existed, Dr. Gomez explains to a congressional committee investigating veteran health issues. "We now understand that the Vietnam War left some veterans fighting biological battles for decades after they came home. The economic impact is significant. Treating these long-term infestations costs millions of dollars, but the human impact is immeasurable. Veterans who have suffered from unexplained pain and illness for decades are finally getting answers and treatment." Robert's willingness to share his story publicly has encouraged other veterans to seek help. His case has literally saved lives by inspiring others to get medical attention for symptoms they had been ignoring or treating as psychological. A year and a half after his surgery, Robert sits in his living room being interviewed by documentary filmmaker Sarah Walsh for a film about hidden wounds of war. The camera captures him as a healthy, vital man who looks younger than his 65 years. "For 50 years I thought I was carrying guilt," Robert tells the camera. "Turns out I was carrying passengers." The documentary, titled The War Inside, will go on to win several film festival awards and bring national attention to the issue of long-term parasitic infestation in veterans. But for Robert, the most important moment comes when the film crew captures him playing in the backyard with Emma, throwing a ball with his left arm for the first time in decades. "The hardest part wasn't the surgery or the recovery," he explains during his interview. "The hardest part was forgiving myself for surviving when my friends didn't. I thought carrying that pain was some kind of tribute to them. I realize now that living my best life is the real tribute. The documentary includes interviews with other affected veterans, medical experts, and family members. It paints a picture of resilience and adaptation, both biological and psychological, that resonates with audiences far beyond the veteran community. Maria appears in the film as well, talking about watching her father suffer and not understanding the cause. "We knew something was wrong," she says. "We just never imagined it was something alive." 2 years after his surgery, Robert walks his daughter Maria down the aisle at her second wedding. She had delayed remarrying for years, partly because she was so focused on caring for her father and Emma. Now, with Robert healthy and strong, she feels free to pursue her own happiness. At the reception, the DJ calls for the father-daughter dance. Robert takes Maria's hand and leads her on to the dance floor, moving with a grace and confidence that had been missing for decades. As they dance to Butterfly Kisses, Maria whispers, "I'm so proud of you, Dad." "For what?" Robert asks. "For fighting, for surviving, for showing Emma that it's okay to ask for help when you need it." Emma watches from the sidelines, already planning to ask her grandfather for a dance next. She's old enough now to understand that her grandfather is special, not just because of what happened to him, but because of how he handled it and what he did afterward. As the song ends, Robert spins Maria one final time, a move that would have been impossible with his old shoulder injury. The applause from the wedding guests is particularly enthusiastic from the table of veterans who have become Robert's close friends through his advocacy work. 5 years after his surgery, Robert sits in Dr. Chen's office for what will likely be his final follow-up appointment. At 68, he's healthier than he's been since his 20s. The scar on his shoulder is barely visible, and he has full range of motion in his arm. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Chen tells him after completing her examination. "Your case continues to be cited in medical literature around the world." "Any regrets about publishing it?" Robert asks. "None whatsoever. Your willingness to share your story has helped identify and treat over 300 similar cases. You've literally saved lives." Robert nods, satisfied. "Carmen always said everything happens for a reason. Maybe I carried those things for 50 years so that other people wouldn't have to." Dr. Chun has followed Robert's case not just medically, but personally. She's watched him transform from a man haunted by hidden shame to someone who has found purpose in his trauma. "What's next for you, Mr. Martinez?" "Emma starts high school next year. I want to be around to see her graduate. Maybe see her get married someday. I've got a lot of living to catch up on." As Robert leaves the medical center for the last time as a patient, he passes the hospital's memorial garden where a small plaque has been installed honoring Vietnam veterans. He pauses there for a moment, thinking about the friends he lost so many years ago. "We made it," he whispers to their memory. "All of us in our own way. The shoulder that carried death for 50 years now carries Emma on piggyback rides through the park. The man who thought his war would never end has finally found peace, not by forgetting the past, but by transforming it into healing for others. Robert Martinez's story reminds us that our bodies keep the score of every battle we've fought, every wound we've sustained, every secret we've carried. Sometimes healing means more than just removing what doesn't belong sometimes. It means understanding why it was there in the first place. In medical journals, Robert's case is known as the Martinez phenomenon, a testament to the human body's remarkable ability to adapt and survive even the most impossible circumstances. But to Emma, he's simply Grandpa, the strongest man she knows, who taught her that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The war inside Robert Martinez lasted 50 years, but love, family, and the courage to seek help finally won the day. Some battles end not with victory or defeat, but with understanding and the profound relief that comes when we finally set down burdens we were never meant to carry alone. The lump that should have been examined became the horror that nearly consumed him. But sometimes the very thing that threatens to destroy us becomes the catalyst for our greatest transformation. In Robert's shoulder, life found a way, and in Robert's heart, hope found a home.